My husband slapped me 3 times at the banquet, smiling each time as if my humiliation were part of the evening's entertainment. The first blow turned my face toward the champagne tower. The second made the room go silent. The third earned a laugh from the woman sitting beside him, his mistress. I remember the sound more than the pain. A delicate little laugh. My husband, Daniel, straightened his cuff and looked around the table at his relatives, waiting for approval. His mother covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked. His younger brother smirked into his wine glass. No one came to help me. I stood beside the table, one hand against my cheek, feeling the heat spread beneath my skin. Thousands of crystal lights glittered above us. Waiters froze along the walls. A violinist lowered his bow. Daniel leaned close. "You embarrassed me," he whispered. I looked at him, then at the woman whose hand was resting possessively on his arm, then at the 3 people laughing behind their glasses. Something inside me became very still. I reached into my handbag. Not for a tissue. Not for my phone to call the police. For one number I had never expected to use against my own husband. I dialed. When the chairman answered, I said only 6 words. "Fire the director. Take everything back." Then I hung up. Nobody at that table understood what I had just done. They would. In 30 minutes. My name is Elena, and for 8 years, I had been married to Daniel Mercer. To everyone in that room, I was simply Daniel's wife, the quiet woman who smiled beside him at company, dinners, and remembered birthdays. Nobody else remembered. They never asked what I had given up to become that woman. Before Daniel, I had worked beside my father, learning the business from the ground up. I knew contracts, property records, investments, and every signature that moved money from one account to another. When my father died, I inherited more than his name. I inherited control. But I never announced it. Daniel knew only that I trusted him enough to let him manage the company while I stayed away from its daily affairs. He called it a gift of confidence. His family called it proof that I was useless. At holidays, his mother introduced me as the lucky wife. At board dinners, Daniel interrupted me whenever I spoke about the company. When I bought our mansion, he told everyone he had earned it. When I bought the 3 cars sitting in our garage, he accepted the keys as though they were rewards for his success. I let him, not because I was weak, because I believed love did not need an audience. Over the years, that belief became my greatest mistake. By the night of the banquet, Daniel had grown so comfortable underestimating me that he no longer bothered hiding his contempt. He thought my silence meant surrender. He had never understood that silence can also mean someone is taking notes. The banquet had begun politely enough. Daniel kept one hand around, his wine glass and the other resting on the back of his mistress's chair. He introduced her as a consultant, never quite meeting my eyes when he said it. His mother noticed. She smiled at me across the table. "Some women," she said softly, "are wise enough to let their husbands handle important matters." A few people chuckled. I lowered my eyes to my plate. Daniel didn't defend me. He simply took another sip. Later, when the chairman praised the company's recent expansion, Daniel accepted the applause with a modest nod. No one mentioned that the property used for the expansion had been purchased through a holding company I controlled. No one knew. That was fine. Then Daniel began telling stories about our marriage. He described me as sheltered. He joked that I needed permission to spend money. His brother laughed hardest. Across the table, his mistress touched Daniel's wrist beneath the white linen. He glanced at her. She smiled. I saw everything. The little exchanges. The private looks. The confidence in their faces. They weren't afraid of consequences, because they believed there were none. When dessert arrived, Daniel leaned toward me. "Try not to make a scene tonight," he murmured. His voice was calm, almost tender. That was what made it cruel. I looked at the reflection of the chandelier in my untouched glass. For years I had mistaken his confidence for strength. Now I understood it was something else. It was ignorance. And ignorance, when left unchallenged long enough, becomes arrogance. I quietly folded my napkin. The evening had not yet reached its worst moment, but I already knew how it would end. The moment I decided it was over was not when Daniel raised his hand. It was when he lowered it. After the third slap, he looked at me with the same expression he had worn during our first anniversary. Dinner, certain. I would forgive him. That certainty broke something in me. I remembered every document I had signed over the years. Every property deed. Every transfer. Every board resolution. Daniel had presented to me for approval while casually calling them routine. I remembered why I had agreed to put the company under his management. Because I trusted him, and because my father had once told me that a person's character was easiest to see when they believed nobody was watching. Daniel had just shown me his. I stepped away from the table. No speech. No tears. I took out my phone and called Marcus, the chairman of the family holding company, the only person besides me who had authority to remove Daniel. Immediately, he answered on the second ring. Is everything all right? I looked across the room. Daniel was laughing again. His mother was whispering to the woman beside him. His brother had already begun telling someone about my outburst. I said, no, Marcus. It isn't. There was a pause. Then I gave him 3 instructions. Remove Daniel as director, freeze his company, privileges pending review, and begin the process of returning the mansion and vehicles to their rightful ownership. Marcus did not ask me to reconsider. He knew the documents. He knew the signatures. Most importantly, he knew I had never used my authority against Daniel before. When I ended the call, my hands were completely steady. For the first time that night, I wasn't waiting to see what my husband would do. I was waiting to see what happened when he discovered I had finally stopped doing nothing. I did not leave the banquet immediately. That would have looked like defeat. Instead, I returned to my seat, picked up my glass of water, and waited. My father had taught me something long before I understood its value. Never make an important decision while your hands are shaking. Mine weren't anymore. I opened the secure folder on my phone and reviewed the documents I had kept for years. The mansion deed was in my name. So were the titles to all 3 cars. The company was more complicated, but not beyond my reach. I held the controlling interest through the family holding company, and Daniel's position as director existed only because the board had appointed him. He had authority. He did not have ownership. That distinction had protected him for years. Now it would protect me. I sent Marcus the relevant documents and instructed our family attorney to prepare everything properly. No forged signatures. No threats. No impulsive accusations. Every step had to be legal. Every transfer had to be documented. Every decision had to survive scrutiny after the anger of that evening disappeared. Then I did something even more important. I told them not to confront Daniel yet. I wanted him to finish the banquet believing nothing had changed. Across the room, he was still laughing. His mistress leaned toward him. His mother whispered something in his ear. They were celebrating a victory that existed only because I had allowed them to believe in it. I watched them through the reflection in the dark window. My revenge would not be loud. It would be undeniable. And when the truth finally reached them, there would be nothing left to argue about. 30 minutes passed before Daniel noticed the change. By then, the banquet had moved into its final course. He was still smiling when his phone vibrated. Once, then again. His smile faded. He glanced at the screen and stood. What is this? Nobody answered. His mother looked up. Daniel opened the message from the board secretary. His appointment as company director had been terminated, effective immediately, pending a formal review. His face went pale. Then another message arrived. His corporate access had been suspended. A third followed. The mansion's property manager had received instructions that Daniel was no longer authorized to make decisions concerning the house. He looked at me. I didn't move. Did you do this? His voice was quieter now. I took one slow sip of water. You should read the documents before asking questions. His brother grabbed his phone. What documents? Daniel showed him. The laughter disappeared. His mother stared at me as though she were seeing a stranger. Then the final message arrived. The titles for all 3 luxury cars were being transferred back under my sole ownership. Daniel lowered his phone. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I could hear the faint clink of silverware from another table. The violinist had begun packing his instrument. Outside the windows, rain traced thin lines down the glass. Daniel finally whispered, "You can't do this." I looked at him. I already did. His mistress slowly removed her hand from his arm. That tiny movement hurt him more than any argument could have. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, nobody laughed. Not anymore. The fallout was quieter than I expected. No one chased me into the parking lot. No one begged me to stay. For several minutes, the people who had spent years treating me as decoration simply sat around the banquet table, staring at one another as though the room had changed shape. By morning, Daniel's position was no longer a secret waiting to be defended. The board had begun its review. His company accounts were restricted, and the stories he had told about his success were suddenly being questioned. His mother called me 6 times. I answered none of them. His brother sent a message saying the family had been humiliated. I deleted it. That word stayed with me. Humiliated. As if the shame belonged to them because their illusion had collapsed. The hardest consequence was not losing Daniel. It was realizing how long I had confused endurance with love. For years, I had protected his reputation at the cost of my own voice. I'd watched people underestimate me and called it peace. It wasn't peace. It was permission. And perhaps that was why the story mattered beyond one marriage. Because most betrayals do not begin with a raised hand. They begin with smaller things. A joke you swallow. A boundary you don't enforce. A lie you forgive because confronting it feels exhausting. The banquet simply made everything visible. I did not destroy Daniel. I stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. And when I finally understood the difference, I stopped feeling guilty for walking away. For the first time in 8 years, my silence belonged entirely to me. 3 months later, the mansion was quiet again. Not empty, quiet. There was a difference. I had changed the locks, sold 2 of the cars, and kept the third because I had always liked driving it. The company had appointed an interim director while the board completed its review. Daniel was no longer part of my daily life. The divorce was finalized. Without the dramatic courtroom battle his family had threatened. There were documents. There were signatures. There were consequences. And then there was silence. Real silence. The kind that doesn't feel like punishment. I began spending mornings in the garden, drinking coffee beneath the old cedar tree my father had planted before I was born. I started working with the company again, not because I needed to prove anything to Daniel, but because I had finally remembered how much I loved the work. Sometimes I thought about that banquet, not the slap itself, the moment afterward, the moment I realized I didn't have to convince anyone that I deserved respect. I only had to stop accepting disrespect. Daniel had wanted an obedient wife. His family had wanted a convenient one. They never understood that the quiet woman at the table had been choosing her silence, not because she lacked power, but because she believed love made power unnecessary. I know better now. Forgiveness may be generous, but boundaries are necessary. And peace is not something another person gives you. It is what remains when you finally stop handing yourself away. That night, they thought they had slapped a woman into silence. They were wrong. They had simply taught her when to speak and when to walk away.